But now we'll take, I just got this big bastard wood rasp, and I come along and just gently, what you're trying to do is just take down any kind of burrs sticking up. It'll affect the filleting when you're going along with your tool to so you don't have any hiccups as it's going along where you hit something and it jumps and then you have to come back and do it again. Take out the little ridges, spots that piled up next to the wires and around the screw holes and bolt holes and stuff. Get out the blue tape that's not buried in epoxy. Doesn't take much. So I'll come back when this is done. I've gone and pulled, like you've seen, all the wires and everything's pulled out. I've taken a piece of plastic pipe, a little short hunk, and then wrap some 60 grit around it, and they clean out all the spots. I got sawdust again. Clean out all the edges, and it's been a few days since I put the Gel Magic on and any other epoxy maybe around there, so you want to rough it up to give it a mechanical a bond. Normally with the System 3 products, you've got like 72 hours to apply the next coat to have a chemical-to-chemical bond between the layers of epoxy. So, but that's gone beyond that, so I've sanded it. I've also taken some masking tape and backed up each of the holes where the bolts had gone through on the back side, so that when we're going to do the next step of painting the seams and any edges that haven't been coated with epoxy yet because of the drill holes and for the bolts and the wires. But you don't want the epoxy dripping down through onto your floor, so I'm going to go ahead and mix up some now, and we'll paint the plywood and the seam about an inch out on each side. That'll be about the width of where the fillets are going to end up at. And then when the fillets cure, then we'll sand them down smooth and then wet out to the line that we put in, the 1.5 inch off line for the 3-inch tape. So that'll come up then. So let me go ahead and mix up some System 3 silver tip, and then we'll brush on the seams and get those done. I'll go ahead and do a little bit right here and then do most of it off camera, but just, brush it on. Get some so that goes in the holes. You want to get those edges soaked out with epoxy so that any water that may get in there won't get in and start rotting out the seam. And then you can see how about that wide. You'll get a little bit of bubbling on the outside where it drips through the wire holes. I should have probably, while I had it untied, flipped it over and done the bottom when I had it that way. But that's it. I'll come back later. Well, the seams were all sealed off, the edges, and then about an inch on either side, and the little bowl holes have been touched up on the edges, and so they'll suck in whatever epoxy they have and seal themselves off. So I'll let that cure tonight, and tomorrow we'll come out and start putting on the fillet material, and we'll mix it up and put it in the bag like squirting frosting on a cake. So if you've seen that, you know it's the same thing I'll be doing this time around. So until then, we'll come back. Before we get around to filleting the seams inside, remember we have these little holes up here to fill in. And what I wanted to do, which I've already done on this side, is I've taken my plane. I've got a medium-sized plane. I don't know, is it A6? an old Stanley, back when they made Stanley was good. Supposedly they're good again. And then just kind of try to take a lot. You want to bevel it into the same angle as it. Side rails are. That way it'll make it easier to, when you bring in your, where's the putty knife? When you bring in a putty knife, to be able to push the fillet material down inside the holes here. Okay. I'm out here and there's still time, so what the hell, just go ahead and mix up some. Easy fillet here, and just kind of push it down into the hole. When it fills up, it'll kind of bubble over. Work over to the other side. Where's the stick? Kind of push it down in there. Most of the time you get just as good of action by the scraping it in. Now you'll see why I went ahead and planed it down. If you do anything, leave it a little high. That way when you clean it up, you'll have something to sand down and not have a depression. Let me try some. Yeah, need more. All this gets shaped later. Call it quits. Okay, we got our bag of fillet material. Just put in a bead. Fill in that void there. And then use your tool. And there's some variability on the hull as to what kind of tool you use at what corner because of the angles. You'll get different radii at different locations, and so you want to kind of use a appropriate get over here, tool. come along with your putty knife. Clean up the excess. I can feel my bag starting to warm up, so I want to get this stuff out as quick as possible. At least spread it out thin so that it's not quite so concentrated. The more it's concentrated, the hotter it gets, and the hotter it gets, the quicker it kicks. Kind of, am I still getting in there? Yeah. Work your edges, keep them clean. Probably should have made it a smaller batches in this one big bag, give me a little more working time, but it's going along fairly quickly. Just look for your little trail behind. Okay, I got another bag, and unlike what I said I wasn't going to do, I made a bigger batch. I'll go ahead and pre-squeeze out a ribbon of this. And backstroke. If you need a little more, just take whatever's accumulated on the edge. Well, I'm all done. I've had to use a variety of tools from flat putty knives, not this one. I'm probably going to come back tomorrow or the day after this is cured and hardened up, and then put another layer on the center, or I may put in 2 layers of glass. I was only going to put a single layer in, but I'd like to have a little more rigidity on the keel line from when you're sitting on the beach or whatever, so I'm probably going to put another just a little bit thicker layer, be about another 1/8 of an inch thick maybe. I don't want to add too much weight to the hull, but it may change. I may just double glass the bottom. So try to get as much of the stuff up as possible at this point while it hasn't cured, and then save yourself a lot of sanding, no matter which way you go, whether I put in another layer or not. some of these ends can be a little problematic because of the angles. They keep changing as it goes along. Through the main part of the midsection there, it was pretty easy to use a little bottle cap that I was using. And then on the bottom keel line, I was able to use my narrower putty knife and just follow along, try to stay centered over the keel. I'll let that cure, and then we'll come back and then give it a good sand, and then we'll go ahead and glass it. On the very bow in there, because it's so sharp, I was able to use just a regular old popsicle stick to get in there to make a nice deep fillet. So that one was taken care of. And then on the front, as these sides came in, the angle started going out to really flat, and so I had to go back to my putty knife again on those sections there. So we'll come back when this is cured, and we'll give it a sand and then see what we need to do to touch it up. Down in here it was easy to get a nice smooth shape because it was consistent all the way along here, and I was able to use my plastic lid to get a really good shape the first time around. But down on these ends here where it starts, it goes from like that over to a flatter surface, I had to change over to my putty knife, and it's a little rougher. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some more and then finish up that coat, do a little broader section down the middle. I also took a straight edge and I laid off a baseline. Let me go back in here again. Off the center line, which I knew because there was this mark right here was an 1.5 inches off from the center line, so I measured back 3/4 to get me back into line. So when I bring along the wider blade to give me a little deeper fillet here, I'll have a nice straight line in order to go on. That's something you want to try to remember, is if you can get some sort of baseline to use as an edge for all the tools or whatever you're doing, so that your bevels or your glass tape or your fillets don't go wandering around on the center line, but they stay consistent along the edge. So also something else I did too, I also came back with my one of my small planes and then beveled this out, and you can see how these little, remember there were little holes there that we put the EZ-Fillet into? I've got them all, let me see if I get a better shot here. Yeah, I've got them all filled in, and then I've already got a first sanding down on it. I'll probably do it one more sand. I had some tear out here because of the grain of this walnut is really difficult to maintain, but I'll get that sanded down again. I may put the plane on it again, but I don't know. I hate doing that because if you fix it here, you might screw it up there. So let me go back to filleting. Okay, we're going to use our fingers. Make sure you have a good glove, and squeeze it on your finger. And just go along and fill in some of the holes and smooth out the transition. Mainly you were trying to transition from this point here where it was good into where it was kind of youtly. Doesn't take much. You can pretty much tell the fiberglass tape will span a lot of this, but if you give it a good base, it makes the final product look a lot better. Well, I'm cleaning up my hands with some vinegar and a cloth, just until I can get in and use some soap and water on it. You want to try to minimize your contact with epoxy as much as possible. Everything's done. We've gone, I went and did another used the wider putty knife on the bottom and gave it a second layer. I wanted a little more bending resistance on the bottom. Got the sides are all sanded and they came out fine. Take the ends, and then we used our finger. Make sure you have a really good glove, and if you got an old, maybe a finger cut off, a good finger off a glove, put that on, then put another glove over the top of it so you got like a double layer. And then come along on the rough spots and just squeeze a little on your finger and then just slide it into those rough spots. I found that's one of the easiest ways to you know, fill up those things. And then just take your time, and then, you know, the biggest secret on this is having the right plastic radius to get these curves and know when to change the tool from something that works fine here to something that works fine out there. And then maybe put a piece of tape or a pencil mark on the seam where you have to transition. So we'll let this cure now. We'll come back probably in a couple days and give it a good cure. It's not as warm here in Seattle. I know it's burning up in the rest of the country. It's probably maybe 63, 64 today outside and cloudy, which, you know, is normal in the wintertime, but not in July. So we'll come back and we'll I'm going to have enough stuff on this. We'll close this out on this one, and we'll come back and glass tape the seams on the interior. And then once that cures, then I'll pop this, and then I'll try to figure out by that time what I'm going to do with the interior. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. I don't want to turn into a kayak. If you want to do overnight trips or whatever, I found in canoeing, I've been out for 2 and 3 week canoe trips in my encounter, and then plenty of dry bags. You know, it's a lot easier to have those around the camp than it is to try to empty out a kayak out through a hatch, and then try to keep the water out, at least when you have all your dry bags tied down, because you've got all these gaps here to tie everything down with. It's really easy to go camping, and then it keeps the weight down. I want to try to, you know, I want this boat to be for somebody that wants to take the electric paddle, put it out, because it's only 14 pounds with the motor and the battery pack, and go out and putt around for a couple hours. So if you want expedition with this, go ahead. If you want to make 2 of them and turn it into a catamaran or, you know, something like that, go ahead. So I thought at one time of maybe stretching it out to maybe 18 feet to make it a double, but we'll see how that goes. So this will finish this, and we'll come back on taping the seams.